بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So tonight, inshallah, we're going to finish, hopefully we'll finish this chapter. And then next week we can start on the chapter dealing with akhlaq and behavior, the etiquette, and the behavior and character of Muslims. According to the plan and some of the prophets. So last week we stopped on page 264, if I'm not mistaken. We're just going to start, just mention it from the beginning in brief. And this is the section of the wudu. Furud al-wudu, the obligations when it comes to making wudu, the things that are obligatory to do when making wudu. And he mentioned how many of them are there? Six. What's the deal? That is six. You gotta remember that. You can't forget this. It's called Ayatul Wudu. That's the name of it. That's the little Ayatul Wudu. One of them, but not only the little Ayatul Wudu, the verse of Wudu that describes Wudu, which is Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse number 6. Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse number 6. And these are from the things we spoke about yesterday. You gotta memorize. Some things have to be memorized, right? You gotta at least know where they are, right? So, numbers, Surah Ma'idah 5. Ma'idah is Surah 5. The verse is verse 6. Surah 5, verse 6, which is called Ayatul Wudu. And in Ayatul Wudu, Allah mentioned four things. All right, four things are mentioned in the verse. But he said, "Is how many things are obligatory for wudu?" He says 6. We get to that, inshallah, today. So last week we did the first thing that was mentioned in the verse. Like Allah says, إِذَا قُمْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِذَا قُمْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ وَامْسَحُوا بِرُءُوسِكُمْ وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ. So Allah said, "Oh, you believe when you stand to pray?" He said, "First wash your faces." Allah says, "Wash your faces." So the face, washing the face is something that is obligatory for wudu. If the face is not washed, then the wudu is not correct. But he mentioned from the face, he says, "Ghusl al-wajh wa minhu al-madmada wastinshaq." We did this last week. From washing the face is also cleaning the nose, which is sniffing the water into the nose and blowing the water out of the nose. I'm sorry. From the face is cleaning the mouth out, rinsing the mouth out, right? Rinsing the mouth out. And he mentioned, what is it? It is tahriquhu. To put water in the mouth and to almost like when you gargle, right? This is from cleaning the mouth. And also from washing the face is sniffing the water into the nose and then blowing the water out of the nose. All of that's considered to be from the face, from the face. So that was the first thing mentioned in the verse. Then Allah says after that, Allah says, فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ. Allah said, and wash your hands up to the elbow. Wash your hands up to the elbow. He says the explanation here, Allah, غَسْلُ الْيَدِ مِنْ أَطْرَافِ الْأَصَابِعِ إِلَى الْمِرْفَقَيْنِ. It says here, washing the hands up to the elbow. This is to wash the hands from the fingertips up to the elbow. Because a person might say, "I already washed my hands," like my hands. But the yet in the Arabic language carries more than just the hand. The word for it that we translate as hand in the Arabic language. We know it to be hand, like us, hand, but hand can also mean the whole arm also. Or up into the elbow like here. So when we have to wash the hand, we don't just say, "Well, I already washed my hand one time in the beginning," right? I don't have to wash it again. What that means is some people will make wudu and they'll start from the elbow. They'll start from the wrist. After they clean their mouth out, after they wash their face, they go to do their hand and they start right here from the wrist. They won't wash this hand, the whole part of the hand. They say, "Well, I already washed it before I started," which is a mistake. It's a mistake that they should start. The wudu starts from the fingertip. That's why it says it's to wash the hands from the fingertips up to the elbow. right? Up to the elbow, meaning including the elbow. The elbow shouldn't be left dry, right? The elbow shouldn't be left dry. The elbows are included in the limbs. They have to be washed. Along with this ayah, he's going to constantly mention also, like he mentions right here. Along with the verse, what explains the verse is what the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. How the Prophet ﷺ made wudu is an explanation for the verse, right? Should the elbows be included? Should they be included? Well, how did the Sahaba describe the wudu of the Prophet ﷺ? Did he leave the elbows dry? Did he leave the ankles dry? But he did not. That's why it says at the end, as has been explained in the Sunnah from the actions of the Prophet ﷺ. So the second obligation in wudu that is also in the ayah is to wash the hands up to the elbow, up to and including the elbow. After that, Allah says, Allah says, and wipe your heads. It doesn't say wash your heads. Allah used a different word, which is wipe. The word wipe is not the same as the word wash. Allah said, wimsahu, masah, to wipe, right? To wipe the head, like we wipe the socks. And when you wipe over your socks, you don't stick your foot in the sink and drench your sock. You wipe the sock, right? It's not like a wash. It's not the same. So we don't have to wash our heads when we're making wudu. We don't have to wash the head and soak the head when we're making wudu. A wipe is enough. He says, again, وَقَدْ بَيَّنَتِ السُّنَّةِ صِفَتُهُ كَمَا فِي حَدِيثِ عَبْدِ اللَّهِ بن زَيْدٍ رضي الله عنه. He said, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ also clarifies how to wipe the head. Allah said, wipe the head, right? But some people who want to disregard the Sunnah as if the Sunnah is not important. If you just stopped and looked at the verse, Allah said, how? Allah said, wipe the head, but it doesn't explain how to wipe the head. In the verse, it doesn't explain how to wipe the head. And that's why Shaykh al-Zakir says the Sunnah clarifies the action of the Prophet ﷺ shows us how to wipe the head for wudu. And this is the hadith where it says, ثُمَّ مَسَحَ رَأْسَهُ بِيَدَيْهِ. It says, then he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he wiped his head with both of his hands. So he used both of his hands. فَأَقْبَلَ بِهِمَا وَأَدْبَرَ. So he took his two hands and he went to the back, like to the back of his hairline, and then he came back to the front, wiping his head. بَدَأَ بِمُقَدَّمْ رَأْسِهِ حَتَّى ذَهَبَ بِهِمَا إِلَى قَفَاهُ. He started here till he went back to his neck, not all the way down the neck to the neck, right, like the hairline. ثُمَّ رَدَّهُمَا إِلَى الْمَكَانِ الَّذِي بَدَأَ مِنْهُ. And then he came back to where he started from. That's the wiping of the head. To go back and then come from, that's enough, right? In the more detailed books, they go into how many hairs have to be wiped in order for the mess of to be correct. And we're not going to do that, but just to let you know, to mention it. What if a person only wipes with one hand? You ever see somebody make wudu and they just go like this? You ever seen that? Some people, they don't want to mess their hair up. You'd be surprised. Right? You should be on that, y'all. It's more important, sisters and brothers, with waves. Both of them mess their waves up. What's going to happen if you mess your waves up? You got a brush in the car. You brush it. It's hair. You rather gamble with your wudu not being correct, you trying to look good, than make a proper wudu and then just brush their hair again. You don't want to mess their waves up and mess their hair, so they like treading lightly on touching their hair that Allah gave them. All right? Allah gave you the hair and then you start losing it tomorrow. They're coming and going. Allah. So to wipe the hair in that fashion, to wipe it like that based on the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, it says wiping the entire head. Shaykh ibn Baz, rahimahullah, he says also, he said, وَمِنْهُ الْأُذُنَانِ. From the head, not the face. From the head, what's a part of the head are the two ears. The two ears are considered a part of the head. لذلك قول النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, a statement of the Prophet, a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which was reported by Imam Ahmed and Abu Dawud, al-Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, and Imam al-Albani, Shaykh al-Albani, rahimahullah, says authentic. Al-Udhunan min al-Ras, that the two ears are a part of the head. The two ears are a part of the head. So Along with wiping the head, this is why once we wipe the head, we go and we finish wiping the head, come to the front, from the front to the back, and back to the front. Then without taking the water, we don't need water. Whatever the dampness is on the fingers, then we go through the ears and the back of the ears, and that's enough for the cleaning of the ears. The cleaning of the ears. This is why it says, لا يأخذ لهما ماء مستقلا. A person doesn't have to get new water. We don't have to wet our hands again when we go to clean our ears and wudu, right? ويجعل سبابته في أذنه. We put the index finger goes inside of the ear, and then a person wipes the ilhami, with the thumbs, the back of the ears to clean the ears. Allahu Akbar. It says with udhunu again. It might sound like common sense, but it's mentioned for a reason. It says, the ears are not washed. The ears are not washed. What are they? Wiped. There's a difference between washing and wiping. That's important. The ears are not washed. They're only wiped. They're only wiped because the ears, the obligation of the ears is similar to the obligation of the head. The ears are part of the head. And what's the hukum on the head? The head's supposed to be wiped, not washed. All right, so we don't have to soak our ears and dump a bunch of water in our ears going wudu. The fourth thing that's mentioned in the ayat, الرابع غسل الرجلين مع الكعبين. Washing the feet, including the ankle. The ankle has to be washed. The ankle can't be left dry. The ankle cannot be left dry. As Allah said, وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ. Wash your feet, and it says ila. If you translate the ila, it says like to, or you might translate up until something. But in this case, it carries the meaning of ma'a, with. Washing the 2 feet along with the ankles. The ankles are not to be left dry. The ankles cannot be left dry when making wudu. He says, with the hadith and walida, he said the wudu. Also, not just the verse, but also, if you look at the sunnah of the Prophet, the description of how the companions described the wudu, they were watching him make wudu. Right? And how did he make wudu? That the ankles were included in the washing of the feet, which shows that the ankles have to be washed.
Someone explain what is considered with the ankle, like is it bone, like right here, like what is considered
The ankle, he said, what is the ankle? The ankle is what's on the outside and inside, the part that sticks out. Maybe a lot of times we consider what the ankle? The outside, right? The inside is all that's jadid, right? We might look at the ankle and look at the outside of the foot, right? But in reality, both bones that protrude, that stick out on the outside of the foot and the inside have to be washed. I'm not going to stick my foot in the camera, but just, now you, right at the top of that bone, right over that bone, all of that needs to be wet, right? And that's why you see some people go to some Saajid. It's easier just to stick your whole foot in the thing if you can. If you can put your whole foot in the wudu station, it's easy. It's easier. You know what I'm saying? They're bending over, the sink is a little high, you might not have a good balance and all that kind of stuff, right? If there's a wudu station, it's a lot easier just to put your foot in the water, wet the whole foot. It's safe. This is worship. The salat is not valid without a proper wudu. How we don't want to mess up our hair to stand before Allah. Like we'd rather look good with an improper wudu, right? Than make wudu properly and then comb a few hairs back. We don't want to wet something. It's not that. It shouldn't be that deep, right? But so those are the 4 things that Allah mentioned in the verse. But the question is, where did he get the other 2 from? Because he says it's 6, right? He says 6. Allah said, "Oh, you believe? إِذَا كُنْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ." Oh, you believe? If you stand and pray, wash your faces. And Allah said, وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ, and wash your hands up, including the elbows. Right? وَانْصَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ, wipe your heads. وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ, and wash your feet, right? Including the ankles, up to and including the ankles, which is 4 things that Allah mentioned. Shaykh al-Baz, Allah says it's 6 things. So now this is where the benefit of what we talked about in class the other day, being able to look at the verse and extract other benefits that you don't see. may not be clear to every person who doesn't have that level of knowledge, right? Also, that all of the rulings don't come just from the ayah, even though that verse is called ayatul wudu, right? The verse of wudu. How to make wudu and learning how to make wudu is not restricted to that verse, because we have a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam where the Sahaba explain how he made wudu. So we want to ignore all that hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and just take the verse. Everything has to be considered. You got to put everything together, and then this is how we understand the ruling on what is included in the wudu and what's not. So it says al-khamisu at-tartib, which is the wudu has to be made in order, meaning the body parts have to be washed according to the order that Allah mentioned in the Quran, right? Meaning you can't wash your feet first and then wash your hands, then wash your head, then do your face last. It has to be mentioned you have to be cleaned and washed in the same order that Allah mentioned in the verse, and this is called at-tartib, which is number 5, washing in the prescribed order on page 265, number 5. Washing in the order of the verse, where Allah mentioned it in the verse. Everything, the order that's mentioned in the verse, this is how everything has to be washed. Play it. Let me see how it's translated. Allah will the translator. I don't know who the translator person is. If I say something, it's not the brother, because he, Sean did a good job. But sometimes it's not clear, it's not a law fair. So yeah, in the middle of 265, right under number 5, it says this is because Allah mentioned it in order, right? And He placed the wiping of the head between 2 washings. So yeah. Meaning the early math, they say that how do we know that order? It has to be in that order. They say, okay, well, I mentioned it like that in the Quran. Okay, there's another issue, but they didn't mention it. Like they say though, the fact that Allah mentioned how many things have to be washed. Exactly. 3. Washed.
Okay.
Right? 3 things, I said, how many things have to be clean? 4 things have to be clean, 3 are washed, 1 is white, right? So they say that, okay, if 3 things have to be, let's just say like, actually, not text-wise. If 3 things have to be washed, let's just mention all the things that should be washed first and then mention the thing that's not washed last, right? With the same, actually, we're not saying that's a rule, we're just saying, why not mention everything that has to be washed, and then since there's something that's by itself, mention it last, right? They say the fact that Allah mentioned what needs to be wiped in the middle of everything else that needs to be washed shows that it has to be done in that order. That's a benefit that the early men talk about. The fact that Allah mentioned the mamsuh, the wipe, something that is wiped in the middle of everything that is washed, is another indicator that shows that this has to be an order, along with the hadith of the Prophet in the order that comes in the ayat. And that's what that line means right there, where it says, لِأَنَّهُ أَدْخَلَ مَنْسُوحًا وَهُوَ الرَّأْسِ بَيْنَ الْمَنْسُوحَيْنِ. Because Allah mentioned, as He says, He placed the wiping of the head between the 2 washings, right? The head is wiped. Before the head is wiped, the arms are washed, and after the head is wiped, the feet are washed. Between 2 washings, Allah mentioned the wipe, that you wipe the head. So they say that shows that it has to be in that order. But also, not just that, they say also, they fit in the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Also based on how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made wudu. And the companions describe how he made wudu. And this is how he made wudu in that order. But that's number 6. That was number 5. Number 6, which is al-muwalat. Al-muwalat. Because it says washing continuously. What does that mean? Washing continuously. Not letting the body part dry up before you wash the next one, right? Is it permissible to talk while you make wudu?
I used to think no.
It's permissible to talk while you make wudu. But the only problem is if you're talking so much that you stop making wudu, and then let's just say you did your right arm and you didn't do your left arm, right? you having a conversation with somebody, you wash your right arm up to the elbow 3 times, right? And then you're having a conversation, and the water on your right arm dries up. That means that you haven't fulfilled number 6, the condition. You haven't been going continuous. That's not continuous. Once the previous body part dries, that's not continuous. That means you got to start your wudu over from the beginning. Clear? Once the previous body part dries, now, of course, y'all, this is not in extreme heat where everything dries up quick, right? We're not in extreme cold weather where everything dries up quick. Weather that's moderate weather where it's not like things are drying up super fast and like that. In those cases, that, as he says, the it says right here in the last paragraph on page 265, it says, and the guidance for this is that a person should not wait until the body part dries before he washes the next body part. That's the dhabit, right? The dhabit. That's the gauge. How can you gauge if you've been continuous or not in your wudu? Because it says the wudu has to be continuous. How do you know if you've been continuous? Well, this is the gauge you can judge by. If the previous limb, if your limbs are drying up, the previous limb already dried and you didn't wash the next one, that means it's not continuous. That means you have to do what? Start from the beginning. Start from the beginning. You start the wudu all over from the beginning. So yeah. It says, based on how the Prophet ﷺ made the wudu, right? Also, they say based on the hadith, this hadith is not mentioned here. Based on the hadith that the man came and he prayed, right? And while he was praying, and the Prophet ﷺ saw on the man's ankle, and this is a lot of benefits in this hadith. He saw on the man's ankle a dry spot the size of a coin. A coin. It was a dry spot the size of a coin on his ankle that it didn't hit. Is it possible to see something like that? How?
Everything else will be wet.
Let's just say everything else is dried up. If everything is dry, how do you see? Is it is it even possible to see that a person missed the spot? How? If it is possible, how?
Maybe the other parts of the body wash,
Like everything dried up. Khalas, everything dried up. How is it possible to tell somebody missed the spot? Yeah, it could be ashy. It's possible. It's possible. Depending on the complexion of a person, you can tell when a spot has been missed because that spot is still ashy. It's possible, right? That part of the body is not blended. The water didn't touch that part, so it doesn't look like the rest of the foot. So I'm not saying that. I'm saying, is it even possible? It's possible, right? And we know it happened because the Prophet ﷺ said it happened in the hadith. He saw a man praying, and he saw the size of a coin on his ankle was dry, and he commanded the man to go back and do what? Make wudu over. Not just go back and wash the foot. Why can't he just go back and wash the foot?
I was going to ask you, why not wash continuous?
Huh?
It wasn't continuous.
How you know it wasn't continuous?
Because it dried up.
Everything was dry at that point. If he was able to just go back and wash the foot, that would have meant that, okay, it must not have been a long time. It must have been, right? If his feet were still wet. If that was the case, he could just go back and wash the rest of the foot, right? But apparently, the feet were dry. So he had to go back and make the wudu from the beginning. That hadith is not mentioned here, but it is mentioned in more detailed books covering the wudu. Everybody clear? Those 6 things are what is obligatory. What didn't he mention so far? He said, wash the face. What didn't he mention? Sisters, I'm sorry, we didn't get the cord. We got the mic, but we didn't get the cord, man. We need like a 50-foot cord. Somebody ordered the cord, but it wasn't 50 feet. Long time. Just waiting on the cord. What didn't he mention about any of the body parts? What do we do when we usually make wudu? He mentioned that. He mentioned simple water, clean the mouth out. Because these are the things, those 6 things are the bare minimum for the wudu to be correct. So I can just do that right there and my wudu is correct. That's the skeleton, huh? He didn't mention, Allah didn't mention how many times to do it. Right? It doesn't say wash your face 3 times in the Quran. It doesn't say that. Right? But yeah, that's why the next part he says, وَيُسْتَحَبُّ تَكْرَارَ الْغَسْلِ الْوَجْهِ is recommended, sunnah, to do what? Wash the face numerous times. To wash it more than once. To wash it more than once, the hands, the face, and the arms, all of these things are recommended. To repeat the washing, the face, the hands, and the feet 3 times, all of that is sunnah, it's recommended. Right? Also, for the cleaning of the mouth and the cleaning of the nose, to do it more than once is 3 times. What's the obligation? Bare minimum, at the least you have to do what? Once, at the least. Now pay attention, y'all. Once doesn't mean you go over it once and keep going. Because if you went over your arm once, for example, and you missed the spot, you didn't go over it once. Clear? If you wash your right arm from the fingertips to the elbow, you did it once. But if for it's still dry right here, that doesn't count as one. What counts as one? A full wash. A full wash, that's 1. That's what you need at the least. Right? Sunnah is to do it 2 times or 3 times. Right? But if you did it 1 time, you say, man, mashallah, you know what I mean? I just learned you do it 1 time, so I'm gonna do it 1 time. Like Allah said in the Quran, I'm gonna practice that. I'm doing that. Cool. But you gotta make sure it's a full wash for each body part. That the fingertips, everything has to be wet. The face has to be wet, the nose, everything cleaned out 1 time, but it has to be completely washed. Clear?
You wash your arm. I see people put their arm under the water. Is it allowed as long as you got enough water in your hands, like
Either way. He said you see people sometimes they make wudu and they stick their whole arm under the water. Right? Which is fine. Or can you cup the water in your hand and pour the water on there? That's also fine. The point is that it's a wash, not just a wipe. Meaning, when you wash these parts, you're not just sticking your fingertips in the water and going like this. No, you're washing it. Don't water on it. And the delik, as the scholars explain, the rubbing is sunnah. The rubbing of it is sunnah, as long as it already reached everywhere. Meaning, you can't just stick your hand or your foot under the water and say, oh, that's 1 time. No, if between your fingers are dry, you didn't wash it. If between your toes are still dry, that's not a complete wash. A complete wash, everything on that limb has to be wet at least once. Then everything on top of that is sunnah, is recommended. And this is why it says, you can't go under 1 time. All right, you can't do a half a wash. You need at least 1 full wash, right? So now we need to understand, how do we know that we can wash each body part 1 time when making wudu, based on what? What's the dalil to say that we can wash everything once? Huh? What I do?
The hadith which says
Hold
sometimes.
on, I'm sorry. I ain't gonna go there. Let me rephrase the question. I ain't saying you wrong, I'm gonna rephrase the question. Based on what we covered so far, how do we know we can make wudu and wash every body part 1 time? Huh? The ayah, the verse. The verse didn't mention 2 or 3. The verse mentioned to wash it. So that proves it has to be done at least once. Clear? Now we move on to the other one, talking about hadith of the Saajid al-Fadi, right? That mentions once, twice, or thrice, right? And that's what he mentioned here, the hadith of Abdullah ibn Zayd, radiallahu anhu, and the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, marrateen. He did it 2 times. He says, وَلَا يُزَادُ عَلَى الثَّلَاثِ. We don't go over 3 times. The Prophet ﷺ didn't wipe anything more than 3 times. Right? وَمَنْ زَادَ عَلَى الثَّلَاثِ فَقَدْ أَسَاءَ وَظَلَمَ. Whoever does that, they've done an evil act. That's not from righteousness. It's not from you really meaning to think you're going to make wudu and you're going to go above what the Prophet ﷺ did. Right? He made it 3 times at the most. Nobody's going to come after the death of the Messenger ﷺ and say, no, 4 or 5 is even better. It's not better. Nothing is better than what the Prophet ﷺ left for us. Then he mentioned the other hadith, which show, those are hadith show the importance of following the sunnah and how detailed the Sahaba were in relaying what they saw from the Prophet ﷺ when he was making wudu. طيب قال رحمه الله أما مسح الرأس فلا يستحب تكراره كما دلت على ذلك الأحاديث الصحيحة. He said, as far as wiping the head, it is not recommended. It's not the sunnah to do the head more than once. The sunnah is the head is to be wiped 1 time. That's right. Wiping of the head is to be done 1 time. Front to back, through the ears. That's it. That's all that's to be done for the head. The mess is, as he says, proven in the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Those are hadith where they describe the wudu of the Prophet ﷺ. It doesn't say he wiped more than 1 time.
All I know is the narration right back to front. Sometimes he broke it back. That is the narration about it. I see it.
He said it's permissible just to go back. Here, go back. And don't come front. Hold on a minute. That gets into the issue that I skipped earlier, right? How many hairs have to be wiped? Now it's an issue of, as they say, what's better? The best is what the Prophet ﷺ did. From the front to the back and back up front, as it comes to hadith. If a person only wiped to the back, of course that's not the best thing to do based on the narration, but does it count? Is it valid enough for a person to pray? It's a wipe. It's valid for him to pray. Now the next thing is, and that it goes further and further in the more detailed books, how many hairs have to be wiped? That's how deep they go. So now if you want to go the least you can do, let's say the least that person can do is wipe a certain number of hairs, even if they didn't go front to back. Right? We're not saying nobody's bald. No, a person has hair. Right? And I'm going to use the people, right? Don't want to mess his waves up. She just got her hair done. Right? She don't want to. Allah Mustaan. It's all dunya, y'all. It's dunya. It's dunya. The hair is dunya. Right? It's nice today, then you lose it in a year and a half and you're gone. You look like a whole different person. You sacrifice your worship for some dunya. It's dunya at the end of the day. That Allah gave you. Allah beautified you with that you owe him at the least to make a wudu properly. Just get your hair done, you don't really want to touch it, so you like, what? Or brother don't want to mess his waves up, so he just like patting around up there. Long side. What's considered to be hair in the Arabic language? It gets into the Arabic language, and what's the least amount that can be considered to be hair? If I'm not mistaken, it's like 3 strands or something like that. Allah,
But it's secret.
huh?
It's a big spread.
Yeah, something like that. It's something very specific like that. But of course, the safest thing is to follow the sunnah of the Prophet all the way, right? Which means that if a person didn't go front to back, the question now is the wudu valid? Well, how much of the head was like? It gets into all of that. طيب. Those are the things mentioned as far as the obligations of wudu. The obligations of wudu. And he mentioned actually he did mention the things that are recommended during wudu, which is wiping more than one time, repeated wiping, and things like that. Like the next section, which is adults with Rabi Ashar, the things that break the wudu. The things that break the wudu. Tayyib. It says that there are 6 things that break the wudu. 6 things that break a person's wudu. If the wudu is broken, that means a person can't pray the salat like that. They have to go back and make wudu over from the beginning. They have to go back and make a fresh, as we say, a fresh wudu. Go back and make a fresh wudu from the beginning. Tayyib. He says, Rahimahullah, Nawaqul wudu, mufsadatuhu. The things that, let's see what it says here, invalidate, or we say break, right? We say it breaks the wudu. Here it says nullify, the nullifiers of the wudu, right? They invalidate the wudu. In basic terms, the wudu don't count. It does not count. It's broken. You have to start over from the beginning. You got to go back to the sink, go back to the bathroom, back to the wudu station, and start from the beginning and make a whole wudu over. If any of these things happen after you already made wudu. Tayyib. There's 6. Tayyib. The first one. Al-awwalu al-khariju min as-sabilayn. Al-khariju min as-sabilayn. Something exiting from one of the 2 openings. What are the 2 openings? Huh? The exits for the bathroom, the 2 private areas. Whether it is the, as they call it, the frontal private area, or they refer to as the back private area, even though they're in close range, right? Whether it's from the private part or from the anal, either anything that comes out of there breaks the wudu. Al-Kharij min as-sabilayn, right? Make sure we understand, y'all. This breaks the wudu. This doesn't necessitate a ghusl necessarily. We're not talking about making a ghusl. What breaks the wudu, right? Clear? Not talking about making a ghusl. What breaks the wudu? So if something comes, as it says, the front and the back, right? Whether it's urine, feces, wind, blood, sperm, seminal fluid, and other than that, anything that comes out of there, either one of the 2 openings, breaks the wudu. Some things that come out, we have to make wudu, and some things that come out, we have to make ghusl. But that's not the topic right now. All right. All we want to know is it breaks the wudu. At the least we know that much. At the least we know that much. Later. How do we know? Allah says, "Oja'a ahadun minkum min al-ghaib." And this is in Surah An-Nisa, ayat 43, where it says, that's the verse at the bottom at the top, or one of you comes after answering the call of nature. Tayyib. Also, لقول النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ولكن من غائط وبول ونوم, discussing the things that would break the wudu. Tayyib. So the first thing is something exiting from one of the 2 openings. Number 2, it says al-kharij al-fahish an-najis min al-jasad. Filth exiting the body. Now it's important to understand, what is filth? Filth exiting the body. Filth is what, y'all? Huh? Urine, okay. What else? Najis. Anything najis is filth. Urine is feces. It's possible, we're not talking about coming out of the 2 openings. Anywhere. If najis comes from anywhere out of the body, even if it's not from the 2 openings, right, then that breaks the wudu. Clear? A person may say, well, how does that happen? Is it possible that sperm can come out of the body from a different area, out of the normal exit place? Okay? For a human being. It's possible these things could come out, even if we're not talking about what happened. Right? We're just talking about, is it even possible for it to happen? It's possible for it to happen. And if it does happen, it breaks the wudu. How does it happen? Is a different situation. A person could be cut here and it leaks. A person has surgery. It could be anything. A person have a sickness where the urine doesn't pass through, it comes back up. Whatever the case may be, if that happens and it comes out of another area of the body other than the normal exit place, it breaks the wudu. That's what they're saying, right? The first, number one was the two openings. We already know that. That's clear. But what about if one of those things comes out from another opening, from what's not a normal, the opening? Does it break the wudu? Then they say yes. In that case, it breaks the wudu. It says here, under number 2, it says, اختلف العلماء في الدم الخارج من غير سبيلين هل ينقض الوضوء أو لا? Right? At the middle of page 269. It says, however, it says some of the scholars have said, the scholars have differed. The scholars differ concerning blood exiting from other than the two openings. Does it invalidate the wudu or not? The scholars differ regarding what? Blood coming from, not the two openings, blood coming from somewhere else. Does it break the wudu or not? Right? He says, فَذَهَبَ بَعْضُ أَهْلِ الْعِلْمِ إِلَىٰ عَدْمِ النَّقْدِ الْوُضُوءِ بِهِ. Some have said, some of the scholars have said, it does not break the wudu. Some say it doesn't break the wudu. If what comes out? Blood. If it comes from where? Not the two openings, somewhere else in the body. We already know if it comes out one of the two openings, the private areas, right, it breaks the wudu. What about if it comes from somewhere else? Some have said no. Why? They say لأنه لم يثبت في ذلك شيء عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. They say why? There's nothing authentically reported from the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم that says that. That's their argument. What do you have to prove that? In the second group of scholars, it says وذهب بعض أهل العلم إلى حصول النقد بما كان كثيرا فاحشا منه. Some of the other scholars, they have said that it breaks the wudu if a lot of blood comes out. If there's a lot of blood that comes out, right? Yes, there you go. There's a large amount of blood. He says, وَقَدْ جَاءَ ذَلِكَ عَنْ بَعْضِ الصَّحَابَةِ وَالتَّابِعِينَ. What are they using as a proof? Well, it came based on what the Sahaba and Tabi'een, what they found in the Sahaba and Tabi'een. وهو الذي اختاره الشيخ رحمه الله هنا. Or, Jay, this is important right here. It says, the first group of scholars said what? It doesn't break the wudu. Why not? That's what we need to know. Fiqh is knowing why not. Not just saying what Sheikh said, no. Cool, that's a fatwa, like pretty much Sheikh. Can I do such and such? Without the person going about their business. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that, y'all. But it's another group of people who desire more from the ilm, from knowledge. They want to know a little further. So I say, Sheikh, well, why is that? Why doesn't it break the wudu? And that's the next level of faith, of understanding. They say why it doesn't break the wudu because we don't have anything authentically reported from the Prophet ﷺ that says it does break the wudu. So how you come and say it breaks the wudu? What do you have to say that it does break the wudu? That's what they're saying, right? The other group of scholars are saying it breaks the wudu. Why? Based on what we have, the narration we have from the companions, the Sahaba, and the Tabi'een, right? Then he says after that, it says, and this is the preferred view of the Sheikh. Who is that? Who's the Sheikh? Sheikh bin Baz. What's the preferred view of Sheikh bin Baz? He takes the position that it breaks the wudu, and he's the author of the book. That's why I mentioned it, right? Akhtarahu. This is his view. This is not the view. It's not like, no, I already spoke about it. The scholars differ. Some say it breaks the wudu, and some say it doesn't. Sheikh bin Baz is of the opinion that it does. Okay, alhamdulillah, he got the authority to do that. He chooses the position that it breaks the wudu, right? And then, everybody clear what just happened? That's Sheikh bin Baz's position. That is not the position of the Islamic Ummah. of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Sheikh bin Baz is a Sheikh, rahimahullah, he can do that. طيب. And there are other scholars on the other side who hold the other position. He says after that, he took the view of the side of cautions and to avoid the differing opinions, which we always talk about, the ahwa. He took the side of this is worship. This is the safer side. The safer side is what? If blood comes out even from another place, just make wudu. That's the safe side. Is it the strongest necessarily? Does it have the most dalil behind it? Not necessarily all the time. But at the least, if a person bled, some blood, a lot of blood came out from another part of the body, but the person made wudu and then they prayed, nobody's going to say, no, you got to make wudu. But if you didn't, nobody's going to say you have to pray over. But if you didn't make wudu, there's an argument. This is the argument. Well, some of the ulama say that you know, it breaks your wudu and you didn't make wudu before you prayed. So now that salat doesn't count for you. You got to go back and it's an argument. It's debatable. Where the safer position removes you from the different other things and from the debate. And that's called the cautious position. والخروج من الخلاف, which Ibn used to always tell us, خروج من الخلاف, to remove yourself from the gray area where the ulama differ. The safer point is number 3, the third thing that breaks the wudu. It says zawal al-aqli bi-nawmin aw ghayrihi, that a person loses their consciousness either by sleep or something other than sleep or otherwise, right? A person loses their consciousness by going to sleep or otherwise. We don't understand that sleep. Some people don't know. When you go to sleep, that breaks your wudu. You can't just wake up and jump in a ring. If you sleep in Jumu'ah, right? You need to be careful. Sleep breaks the wudu. You stand up and just jump in a ring because you heard that somebody tapped you. You didn't even hear your mama. Somebody shook you, right? And you have to jump up and get in the ring, right? Sleep breaks the wudu. It says the in the noma ladinnatul khuruj al-hadith. He says it is when you're sleeping, as it said there, it's a high possibility that while you're sleeping, that you broke your wudu. It's a high possibility, right? A person can be sleeping, they can break wind and not even know it, right? A person can be sleeping and they can touch their private area and not even know it. If it's touching the private area, right? Skin on skin, and that's coming next. Touching the private area, skin on skin breaks the wudu. So if a person sleeps, they have no way of determining if they did that or not. Yet, he says also, وَهُوَ لَا يَحَسِنُ بِهِ إِلَّا يَسِيرُ النَّوْمِ. لا يحس به إلا يسير النوم. I'm sorry. فإنه لا ينقض الوضوء. And this is the issue where people use, where it says here, it says, unless it is a light sleep. The light sleep does not invalidate wudu. The light sleep. Not the sleep when you knocked out and you snoring and then somebody wake you up. Right? As we call it, I think you translated here, it says drowsy. You know how you doze off, but you're sitting up, and the ulama describe and specify what type of sleep that looks like. Now a person's laying down flat. Right? He says, the Sahaba, the companions, كانوا يصيبهم النعاس. They used to get drowsy waiting for the salah. Now you doze a little bit, right? You can still hear what's going on around you. وهم ينتظرون الصلاة. And they were waiting for the salah. So they might get drowsy and doze off, right? Not the drowsy and like sleep, nah, you're snoring, and that's it.
So sitting up, basically good. Lay down. What's the difference?
The difference is, you know how you sleep, right? We call it sleep. But then again, we say, no, I wasn't sleeping, right? If a person walks by, your eyes closed, and you lean up against the wall, they're gonna say, what? You sleep. In reality, but realistically, is everybody who looks like that sleep? No, right? And the person knows. We don't know. We're looking at, unless you're snoring, falling over, like, yo, you was sleep. Like, you gotta make them do it. If a person leaning up against the wall, though, and they got their head on the wall, they looking at their phone, looking at a book, and they doze so they can hear you talking, right? You know how that you can hear people talking, you can hear the door closed, right? It's a doze. It's not a heavy sleep, it's a light, one of those, waiting for the salat. When you're waiting for the salat, they pray 5 minutes later than they usually pray. The person's sitting there waiting. That's based on what? How the companions did it. Not based on what we said. The Sahaba used to do that and then get up and pray. They would go make wudu before they prayed. Which shows, right? Which shows what? Is it possible the Sahaba pray without wudu? Huh? Impossible. If the Sahaba got up and prayed without making wudu, knowing that they had to make wudu, impossible. Which proves that that type of nod with those off doesn't break the wudu. Now you could be sitting up straight and still be knocked out. So not about just sitting up straight. You be sitting up straight, you're gone. Right? We're talking about you sitting up straight, or you could be laying down flat and you're not knocked out. It's not sitting up straight or laying down. Are you conscious or not? Can you hear stuff going on or not? Are you in that deep sleep where, you know how it is, you thought you would sleep for 5 minutes and 40 minutes went by? That's not no light sleep, right? Tayyib. He says, so the things that remove a person from consciousness, whether it's sleep or otherwise, meaning if a person like blacked out, as we say, they lost their mind, like literally, they start losing their mind, right? Or a person was drinking, intoxicated, right? They lost their mind, right? These things also break the wudu, because a person loses their sanity, right? A person is intoxicated, or a person faints or passes out, they lose consciousness, right? So yeah, number 4, the 4th thing that breaks the wudu. الرابع مسح الفرج باليد قبلا كان أو دبرا من غير حاد. To touch either one of the private parts, whether it's really we can refer to them again as the 2 openings, right? Whether it's the front or the back, male or female, touching either one of the private parts with the hand. And this is if you look at the book, and you see the comma pretty much specifies what the conditions are for the break wudu. Touching the private parts, front or back, without a barrier. There's nothing in between your hand, skin and skin. It's skin on skin. Skin on skin, when it comes to the private parts, breaks the wudu. Skin on skin. Now, if there's something between the skin, whether it's cloth, it's clothing, a towel, right, then that's a different case. It doesn't fit the description. Clear? So yeah, he says here, again, this is important. It says at the top of page 270, what does it say? This is the what? The viewpoint of who? The Sheikh. This is his who? What Sheikh? Sheikh Ibn Baz. This is Sheikh Ibn Baz's position. He takes this position, which tells you that what? It's another position. It's another position. Other scholars, they differ with him on this, right? And it's not just him, it's groups, right? This is the viewpoint of the Sheikh, and it is the consensus of the scholars and the correct opinion. That's not, all right. You ready? Like, it says here, this is the viewpoint of the Sheikh, which means what? That's his view, and if that's his view, then that shows that is what? It's another view. If there's another view, then that means it's not. Huh? It's not consensus. All the scholars didn't agree on it. Play it. It says after that, reading from the book, it says after that, and it is, meaning this position that embraces the word, and it is the consensus of the scholars and the correct opinion. Yeah. Does it say that in Arabic? It doesn't say that in Arabic. It says Jumhur. Jumhur does not mean consensus, y'all. So it shouldn't say there consensus. A person will understand that and say they always talk about consensus. It's ijma'. That means all the scholars agree. That's what ijma' for consensus is. All the scholars don't agree. Right? So it doesn't mean consensus here. But Jumhur can be translated like most of them hold this position. Many, most, but not all. If you say all, then we don't have to. If all of the scholars agree, right? If it's ijma, we don't have to mention Sheikh bin Baz's name. His name is not, if we're going to use like names of sheikhs, Sheikh bin Baz's name is not bigger than Imam Shafi or Imam Ahmed, rahimahullah al-Jamiyah. But if we use the names, if it was like that, there would be no point in mentioning Sheikh bin Baz's name if it was ijma. If it was consensus, khalas, it's consensus. All of the ummah, the scholars, they already agree. Nobody's arguing. Why we have to say Sheikh bin Baz's viewpoint? Because there are a khilaf in the issue. Meaning, here it shouldn't say consensus, but it should say like majority of the scholars, or many of the scholars, majority of the scholars. Maybe you could say it like that, but not consensus. Along with us. Later, in Arabic it says "huwa qawl al-jumhur al-ulama," right? Which doesn't mean consensus. And then in Arabic it says "huwa sahih." إذا كان المس بدون الحال. And then Sheikh al-Razak, he also agrees. But this is Sheikh al-Razak's opinion also. He's of the opinion, right? He says, and this is the correct opinion. According to who? According to Sheikh al-Razak, Hafidhullah. As long as what? It was done without a barrier in between. Skin on skin, they're talking about breaking the wudu. We're not talking about a person might be drying himself off, getting out the shower with a towel. Is it a barrier between them? It's not skin on skin, right? Also, the mess with the yad, with the hand. The hand touches another body. The hand touches the private part. He says further down, whether sawa'un mas farjahu aw farjayhi, whether a person touched their own body part, own private area, or they touch somebody else's, it breaks the wudu. Then he goes on, sawa'un kana mamsus saghiran aw kabiran, whether you touch a child, right? You change the child's camera or something like that. Right? Or it could be somebody older. Y'all. Older people sometimes have to wear pampers. Some people work in the field where they have to take care of people who are handicapped. They can't, right? You might have to change. They might have to wash them up, right? If you happen to touch the private area, skin on skin, it breaks the wudu. We're not talking about like halal touching with children, pedophiles and stuff. We're not talking about that. We're talking about people who have children. They change the baby's pamper, right? We're talking about people who may be taking care of elderly people, who changing them and they cleaning them and stuff like that. If it was the case that they touched the private part of that person, it will break the wudu. Whether the person or the body part that is touched is the body part of a living person or the body part of a dead person, right? Is it possible to touch the private area of a dead person? It's possible, right? Even if it's not intentional. All of that would break the wudu. Based on the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whoever touches their private area, then they should make wudu. They should make wudu. The word says penis, dhakar in Arabic, which is not restricted. Of course, it's restricted to men, but it means the private area. What the meaning of the private area. Tayyib. Number 5, it says, Aklu lahm juzur. Aklu lahm juzur. Eating camel meat. Eating camel meat, which is not popular here, but Islam is not restricted to. Good. All right. Later, why does eating camel meat break the wudu? This is based on the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then he was asked in a hadith, "Atawadda'u min lahum al-ibl?" Do we make wudu after eating camel meat? Qala na'am. He said yes. So the scholars use that to say that the camel meat breaks the wudu. Should I perform ablution? Should I perform wudu after eating camel meat? The hadith says, and he said yes. He said yes, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. That hadith is in Sahih Muslim. Number 6, the 6th thing that breaks the wudu, الردة عن الإسلام عَادَنَ اللَّهُ وَالْمُسْلِمِينَ ذَلِكَ. May Allah protect us all. The person who apostates from Islam. Apostasy from Islam, and we seek Allah's protection from that for all the Muslims from leaving Allah's deen. This breaks the wudu. This breaks the wudu. It says, وَالرِّدَّ نَاقِضَةٌ لِلْوُضُوءِ. الرِّدَّ, apostasy, breaks the wudu. وَمُبْطِلَةٌ لِلْعَمَلِ كُلِّهِ. And it negates and it avoids and it erases all of a person's good deeds that they had previous to that. Allah protect us. It invalidates the wudu, it nullifies all of a person's actions based on the statement of Allah Jalla wa Ala, where Allah said, وَلَئِنْ أَشْرَكْتَ لَيَحْبَطَنَّ عَمَلُكَ. And if you join others in worship with Allah, if you were to make shirk with Allah, as Allah said, then surely all your deeds will be in vain. All your deeds will be invalidated based on a person making shirk with Allah Jalla wa Ala. So apostasy breaks the wudu. Breaks the wudu. He says here, after that, we didn't mention it, but it also says here, وَلِأَنَّهَا حَدَثٌ فَتَدْخُلُ فِي عُمُومِ قَوْلِهِ لَا تُقْبَلُ صَلَاةُ أَحَدِكُمْ إِذَا أَحْدَثَ حَتَّى يَتَوَضَّأَ. He says that apostasy also is a form of hadith, which is wow. See what she said, I can't hear it. Yeah. Huh? The arrow, I can't hear it. Come on. Oh, all right. طيب. What was I saying? Hadith. Hadith is a two types, either hadith asghar or hadith akbar. Hadith is a state of ritual impurity, right? It's a state you can't see it on a person. Just like wudu, when a person breaks their wudu, if we don't have wudu, that means we have hadith. We're in a state of hadith, right? Hadith asghar. That means we need to make wudu to pray. He's saying that apostasy is also a state of hadith, right? It's ritual impurity. You're impure Islamically, and you need to purify yourself, right? And there's a couple different ways Islamically that we can purify ourselves. Either we make wudu, or either we have to make ghusl. This level of hadith, a person has to do what to be pure? Take shahada. And that's why it says the fact that they need to take the shahada, they fall under the general hadith that no salat is accepted from any of you until you make wudu, right? Because you broke your wudu by leaving Islam. The last portion of this section, as it says, the 10b. And this is basically, it's important to mention these issues. It says, أَمَا غَسْلُ الْمَيِّتِ. The question comes up, if you wash a body, if you're the washer of the body at a janazah, does that break the wudu? If you wash a body, does that break your wudu? You went in there with wudu, for example, and now you wash the body, does it break the wudu? It says, فَالصَّحِيحُ أَنَّهُ لَا يَنْقُضُ الْوُضُوء. وقول أكثر أهل العلم لعدم الدليل على ذلك، لكن لو أصابت يد الغاصب فرج الميت من غير حائل وجب عليه الوضوء، والواجب عليه أن ألا يمس فرج الميت إلا من وراء الحائل. طيب, number one, this is Sheikh Al-Bas, he says, as far as the washing the dead, when you wash a body, he said, what is the correct opinion, according to Sheikh Al-Bas, is that it does not break the wudu. He says, Sheikh Al-Bas says, and this is the opinion of most of the people of knowledge. Why? They say because there's no proof supporting that if you wash a person that it breaks your wudu. They say they have no proof. He says, but if you're washing a person and you happen to touch the dead body's private part, then what? You gotta make wudu, right? You have to make wudu. Sheikh Al-Razak says, اختلف أهل العلم في هذه المسألة على قولين. Sheikh Al-Razak says that the scholars have differed on this issue as far as when you wash a person for the janazah, they call you up and say, listen, you go wash your body. You go to wash the body, you make wudu before you leave the house, you get there, you wash the body. When you finish washing the body, did that break your wudu or not? The ulama different. The scholars different. طيب. He says, some say it's obligatory to make wudu, and some say it's recommended to make wudu. Sheikh bin Baz, rahimahullah, he chose the position that you do not have to make wudu. It doesn't break your wudu. Why? Based on what? He says that there's no dalil. There's no dalil that you have. This is what they're saying. It's not just Sheikh bin Baz. The scholars who say it doesn't break wudu. They are saying you have no proof Islamically to say that washing a person breaks your wudu. They say in the asl, the origin is that if I make wudu when I make my house, when I left the house, I made wudu when I left the house, right? The origin is that my wudu still stands because I don't have anything Islamically to say that I broke it, right? It says an asl b'qat tahara, and then he says the hadith that y'all are using, because they do have a hadith, the other guy have a hadith, where it says man ghassala mayyitan فليغتسل, right? This is on page 271 in the middle. Whoever washes the deceased, let him take a bath, make a ghusl, right? فليغتسل. He said, Sheikh bin Baz. He says, this is Sheikh Azhar. فقد قال عنه الشيخ. Sheikh bin Baz says about the hadith, الحديث المذكور ضعيف. The hadith is weak. So the hadith that y'all using is weak. So I don't, basically in a nutshell, I don't recognize that hadith that you're using because it's not authentic. So in reality, we're back to square one. You don't have anything to substantiate that it breaks your wudu, right? That hadith is reported by Imam Ahmed and Imam Abu Dawood, Ibn Majah, and Abi Hurairah, right? Sheikh bin Baz said about the hadith what? Huh? Sheikh bin Baz said it's weak. Sheikh Al-Albani said it's sahih. Where you going? Where you going, Yahi? I'm just saying. Sheikh bin Baz said the hadith is weak. Sheikh Al-Albani sahahu al-Albani. Sheikh Al-Albani said it is authentic. At this point, right now, where we are right now, we're going to choose who we're comfortable with, which is fine. So it's you choose Sheikh Al-Albani, you choose Sheikh bin Baz, cool, but you can't make him take. That's the problem we got.
Like after you finish washing the body, we go to pray, you gotta go.
Well, it depends on when you wash the body. Like if you wash the body 9 in the morning, and the janazah at 1 o'clock, you got time.
We'll just right away.
That's a different story.
Yeah.
That's a different story. That needs to be considered in the time. Preparation time.
What you said. Sheikh bin Baz said.
Sheikh bin Baz said you don't have to make wudu. And he said that a hadith that says you do have to make wudu is weak. So due to the fact that hadith is weak, y'all don't have no dalil to say you have to make wudu. That's what he's saying. The other scholars are saying we have this hadith. This hadith is authentic. Like Sheikh Al-Albani said the hadith is authentic.
You know why he said it was weak?
I don't know why he said it was weak, but that's a issue of hadith. I don't know why he didn't mention why he said it was weak. He said it was weak.
All the scholars had discussions about
Yeah, of course he got a position. It's not mentioned here, though. Sheikh Uthaymeen had the position, but it's not mentioned here. But it's good to see that. Now, which position you take? A lot of the issues are like this. All right? Sheikh bin Baz said one thing, Sheikh Al-Albani said something else. Now what? So if I take the position of Sheikh Al-Albani, what? I'm now on the Sunnah. If I take the position of Sheikh bin Baz, and I don't take Sheikh Al-Albani's position, now what? The problem is we don't operate like that. A lot of us don't operate like that. Sheikh Al-Albani said it's authentic, you gotta take that. He a muhaddith for this time. Like, you remember Sheikh bin Baz wasn't a muhaddith? Was Sheikh bin Baz a person of knowledge of doing a hadith? Or is it?
But if there's not just this issue, if there's a clear cut, literally, you see that, you have to take, and you understand that, you have to take that.
You yourself, yeah. Not everybody else.
Okay,
right. It might be crystal clear to me, but it ain't crystal clear to 60 people in the room. My job is to do what I see to be correct. To me, that's crystal clear, and that's what I'm going with. And the other 60 people might do something else. How did that? So yeah. He says, also, lastly, he says, وَقَدْ ثَبَتَ عَنِ النَّبِيِّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ فِي أَحَادِيثٍ أُخْرَى ما يدل على استحباب الغسل من تغسيل الميت. He said that other hadiths show that it's recommended. Even though he didn't mention them, he said other hadiths show that it's recommended to make a ghusl after washing the body, right? They show it's recommended. Later, he says as far as touching, a person is washing the body and they end up touching the private part of the deceased. He said, "A نفس الفرج لا تغسيل الميت." لا تغسيل الميت. It says لما anyway, same thing we just covered, right? Basically, it breaks the wudu if you go in there and you happen to touch the private part of the deceased, right? In that case, it will be obligatory to make wudu if you touch them. What? Skin on skin, skin on skin, right? الواجب عليه أن ألا يمس الفرج الميت إلا من وراء الحائل. The obligation is that you don't touch the deceased in the private area except that you got a barrier, something on your hand. If it's not skin on skin, it has to be something between the skin, because touching the odor of a person is haram. Another ilay, also looking at the odor, is haram, not allowed. Later, so the person is to be covered up with whether it's cloth or whatever it is to cover their odor while washing the body. It says هكذا مس المرأة لا ينقض الوضوء مطلقا سواء كان ذلك عن الشهوة أو غير الشهوة في أصح قول العلماء ما لم يخرج منه شيء لأن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قبل بعض نسائه ثم صلى ولم يتوضأ. The next issue is sisters and brothers. If you touch a man you're not married to, does it break your wudu? This is where the issue of shaking hands of women comes in. Hugging, right? Hugging sisters and brothers and sisters, hugging. And people that are allowed for you to marry. We're talking about hugging your brother. We're talking about hugging and touching people that are allowed for you to marry. Is it allowed to touch women, even if it's not with desire, like you're trying to feel on or she's trying to feel on you? Touching a woman or a woman touching a man that is not that they are allowed to marry. Does this break wudu? And this is on page 272 in the middle. It says, likewise, touching a woman. Sheikh Ibn says, likewise, touching a woman does not break the wudu at all. This is Sheikh Ibn says. He says, rather, even if it was done, whether it was done with desire or without desire, right? This is at the top of page, 272. Yeah, that's it. I'm sorry, the middle. Touching a woman does not invalidate the wudu, and this is unrestricted. It is the same if you touch her with desire or without desire. According to this is Sheikh Ibn, he says what? According to the most correct statement of the scholars. What does that mean? According to the most correct statement of the scholars. If he says the most correct, right? There's other opinions, because here, it says here in the text, it says, أصح قولي علماء, right? The ulama have two statements concerning this issue. There's two opinions concerning this issue. Sheikh Ibn Baz says, the most correct opinion is that it doesn't break the wudu. That's statement Sheikh Ibn Baz's position, okay? And that's why it says, according to the most correct opinion of the scholars, is according to Sheikh Ibn Baz, which shows that it's another position, right? It shows that's another position. طيب. He said, why? Because the Prophet ﷺ قبل بعض نسائه ثم صلى ولم يتوضأ. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he kissed some of his wives, and then he stood to pray, and he did not make wudu before he stood to pray. Right? He did not make wudu before he stood to pray. طيب. He says, at the bottom of page 272, and this is the end of this chapter, he says, ولأن الأصل عدم النقض الوضوء إلا بدليل صحيح واضح وليس في هذه المسألة دليل صحيح واضح يدل على نقض الوضوء. He says that what? In this issue, number one, the Prophet ﷺ kissed some of his wives and he stood to pray, he didn't make wudu. Right? That's the first thing. After that, After that, he says also the origin, the asl is that the wudu is not broken unless we have something from the dalil to show that the wudu is broken. What dalil do we have to show that the wudu is broken? He said unless we have a clear cut dalil showing that if you touch a woman, the wudu is broken. And he says we don't have that in this issue, according to this position, according to him. Now remember, y'all, the scholars who hold the other position, they might have dalil, but it might not be recognized by the other side. Just like they had a hadith, but they said that hadith weak. Did they have dalil? They had dalil. They said the hadith, but they said that hadith is weak. Sheikh bin Baz said the previous hadith was weak. Sheikh al-Albani said the hadith was authentic. Some scholars say the hadith is weak, and some scholars say the hadith is authentic. It's the same thing. Now where do we go from here? Can I make you see this hadith to be authentic? Can they make them to see the hadith is weak? These are scholars. These are not regular people. This is what it meant. Like, so according to Sheikh bin Baz in this position, he said there's no clear cut dalil. He said this, and he says also, this is also important. We reached that, inshallah. He says also at the bottom of 272, it says, and this would cause general harm in every home if it did invalidate wudu. And if touching a woman invalidated wudu, the messenger of Allah will clarify it. So now they're saying what? They're saying there's no clear cut dalil. What we do have, they said this is what we have. We know the Prophet kissed some of his wives. He stood to pray and he didn't make wudu. So that means what? It didn't break, this is up, it didn't break the wudu. On top of that, we don't have anything showing clear cut that if you touch a woman, it breaks your wudu. Nothing clear cut according to their position. On top of that, it says, this is something that everybody, all the Muslims will be affected by something like this. And there's nothing clear cut to say that this was the case. Every Muslim will be affected by this type of issue. How many people come and visit that you're not related to that you might touch? Whether it's just a touch, not even with no type of right desire behind it. He says, and if that was the case, the Prophet would clarify that in general. This is what they're saying. Does that mean, because remember, y'all, they didn't bring the other position. They didn't bring the details at the other position, right? They just mentioned in their position, which is fine. You can do that because you're the author, right? But that doesn't mean the other side doesn't have anything with them. Like lastly, he says, well, I'm not called Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the ayat al-Nisa, or Ma'idah, what Allah says in Surah al-Nisa, and Surah al-Ma'idah, the verse where Allah says, oh, la nastumun nisa, or la nastumun nisa, or you have been in contact with women, right? It says here, and this ayat is talking about what Rachel will do when a person has a made ghusl. What's meant here? It says, where it says in that verse, those verses, وَالْمَرَادُ الْجِمَاعِ فِي الْأَصَحِّ مِنَ الْعُلَمَاءِ. Again, it says, what does it mean? What does it mean if you touch women in that verse? If you've been in contact with women, right? Al-Lams is to touch. You translate it means to touch, right? The ulama differ on what these ayat mean. Again, he said, it says the intent here in the verse is sexual intercourse, not just touching them, right? He says, according to the most correct statement of the scholars, because the scholars have two positions on it. Some say it means intercourse. If you have intercourse, that breaks your wudu, of course, right? It doesn't mean just touching them, and that's what they're saying. They're holding a position that it means intercourse. He says, as it says here, according to the most correct of the two opinions of the scholars, who will hold Ibn Abbas. There's also the position of Ibn Abbas, the companion. But Jama'atun in the Salaf al-Khalif. Wallahu waliyul tawfiq. And according to a group of the Salaf, from the Salaf and from the Khalif, from the early generations down to the later generations, many of them hold the opinion that ayat, if you come in contact with women, meaning if you have sexual intercourse with women, you will have to make ghusl, of course. But the other men don't hold that position. Sheikh al-Razak says the statement of Ibn Abbas, and the Salaf and the Khalif, he said, they say that it is sexual intercourse, not just touching. But there are two opinions regarding this issue. وأولى القولين في ذلك بالصواب قول من قال على الله بقوله and Jina. He says, Sheikh al-Razak holds the same position. He said, what is the most correct opinion is that what's meant is intercourse, which meant is intercourse. Why? He says, بصحة الخبر عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه قبل بعض النساء ثم صلى ولم يتوضأ. This is not a very in-depth research here, but it's an issue. It's a mess. That's an issue. He said, based on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he kissed some of his wives and then he went to pray. Play it. What about the woman that's not related to you? They didn't get into that. The issue is deeper than was mentioned here, but this is a general glaze over of the issue. And the point being is that we can see at least you have issues where the scholars differ, and it's not all about names, y'all. You can't get caught up on what Sheikh said. That's the problem. This Sheikh said it, so it must be the Lord. We won't use the names of Sheikhs. Big Sheikhs who said a lot of other things that we do on a daily basis that many scholars, big time, we don't just use names. They say otherwise, right? So we need to get accustomed to the dalil. We're stronger in our eyes with whatever ability we have to look at issues, and we have to get away from just names. If a person is comfortable with that, that's fine. If a person says, well, I'm going with the thing in Sheikh Baz because I read his book, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying you can't do that. You can't force nobody to stop where you stop, though, because the follow him, the person wants a little more, they want to seek further clarification, which is also fine. If there's no questions, okay. Hold on, sister. The brother's coming to translate the question, because of course we forgot to get the thing. We apologize. What'd you say?
No desire touching them, basically, you gotta break up the
It's a sticky issue, ain't it? Huh? It's dangerous. Is it dangerous, sisters? Then what's the safest thing to do? Don't be hugging people, especially at work. Sisters get like brothers and sisters. People get comfortable at work, like, you know what I'm saying, like they not married, like these people can't be married. Don't get comfortable like that and let people get comfortable. I don't know if sisters know, but men, we always looking for a chink in your armor. Now we want to see how far she gonna let me go. Don't start thinking because Sheikh said don't break the wudu, I can't touch men. No. You always cut off the roads to harm. You gotta cut off the roads of harm. Now, does it break the wudu? That's the issue. Let's go there. Does it? Huh? There you are. Good. In the event that it does happen, that's the issue we're at now. Now, some say it breaks the wudu and some say it doesn't. What's the safer route? The safer route is don't touch it. But in the case it happens, you get your change at the supermarket. That's the safest thing, no doubt. Safest thing is always, like you mentioned earlier, to make wudu. That's safe, right? Being an obligation is a different issue, and of course, there's more to this issue than is mentioned here. But I'm only discussing it because it's mentioned. You can't skip the whole thing, right? But it's a lot more details to the issue. Maybe I think they're going to get to that in Monday's class. Yeah, it's going to come again in Monday's class. It's going to come again with a little more detail. But of course, when it comes to worship and things like that, you got to hold that. It's always safer to be safe, right? Along those best. Any other questions? It's always safer to be safe. Does that make sense? It's safer to be safe, especially when it comes to worship. Like we'll stop here, inshallah. Next week, we're going to start the chapter on edit. It says adornment with prescribed character. The behavior of the Muslims and the character of the Muslims and what we've been left with in Quran and Sunnah, or how we should behave and carry ourselves as Muslims. So Allah wa sallam wa barak Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi.